Hi, I'm Ruby. My mother interrupted my engagement toast to say, "He'll leave you too," then banned me from the family. But that wasn't the worst part. She said I was no longer her daughter, and then tried to erase my career, my relationship, and even my sanity. Turns out the man I loved, she had once loved in secret for 5 years. So tell me, what do you do when the woman who raised you becomes the enemy you have to outsmart just to survive? The evening was as picturesque as anyone could hope. The lights strung along the oak trees twinkled like tiny stars, casting soft golden shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. A jazz trio played near the garden, the gentle melody of Moon River wrapping around clusters of guests balancing champagne flutes and white napkins. From the outside looking in, it was the kind of engagement party that belonged in the society section of a glossy Southern magazine. My mother, Adia, had coordinated every detail. She'd chosen the venue, the menu, even the color palette, ivory and gold, with muted accents of sage. Not because they reflected Alazny and me. No, she said sage looked timeless on camera. She'd hired a professional photographer and a videographer, not for memories, but for image. There was always an angle with her. But I let it go. For once, I had convinced myself this night could be about joy. Standing next to Alazny, who looked devastatingly handsome in his charcoal blazer and open-collar shirt, I felt almost seen. Maybe this was the night I stopped being Adia's unfinished project and became her accomplished daughter. When the servers began passing out flutes for the toast, I told myself, "Don't brace for pain tonight. Maybe this time will be different." Adia raised her glass before the hush even settled across the crowd. "To my daughter," she began, her southern drawl slow and honeyed, eyes glittering under the lights. "To Ruby and her very fortunate fiancé." Light laughter trickled from the guests. My cheeks warmed. "And may this be the one that sticks," she added, smiling wide, then narrowing her gaze like a blade. "Though I'll say it plain, sweetheart. He'll leave you too." The air split in two. I heard the snap of someone's bracelet breaking behind me. A gasp rippled from our left. Alazin's hand tensed around mine, but I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move at all. Adia, still smiling, tilted her head slightly, as if daring anyone to call her out. "What?" "A mother worries," she added. "We've all seen patterns." My mind kicked into survival mode. I smiled, tight, practiced, and took a long sip of champagne. My jaw ached from holding steady. The room adjusted. Conversations restarted. A new song played. In Charleston, we don't do confrontations at events. We swallow. That night, I walked through the garden with Alazin, who tried to make light of it. "Maybe she meant it differently," he offered, clearly unsure. I didn't correct him. There was no point. I'd learned long ago, when Adia cut, she didn't miss. The next morning, I woke up early, unable to shake the steel-tight knot in my chest. I opened my phone, scrolling through photos tagged from the party. Everyone looked stunning. The tables, the guests, the cake, and then there it was, the official family portrait. I wasn't in it. My heart thudded so loud I thought the neighbors would hear it. I checked again, enlarging the photo, scanning the edge. No mistake. I had been cropped out, not forgotten, intentionally removed. I called Rowena, my cousin, who answered on the third ring. "Hey," she said, already cautious. "Why wasn't I in the photo?" A pause, then a sigh. "Aunt Adia, she said it would look cleaner without too many people on one side." "She said that?" Rowena didn't reply, but I knew silence was confirmation. I hung up and stared at the screen. It wasn't about the image, it was the message. You don't belong in the frame. My mother didn't just humiliate me, she wanted to erase me. I sat alone at the kitchen table for what felt like hours. The image burned into my vision. A part of me wanted to call her, demand an explanation, force her to admit what she'd done. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I turned to the mirror, still dressed in my engagement party dress. The sequins shimmered under the morning light, mocking the bruises beneath my calm. "You think I'm going to fall apart?" I whispered to my reflection. "You don't know me at all." That evening, after taking a long walk through the streets of the historic district, I returned home and sat on the edge of my bed. I reached for my phone and typed a message to Adia. Thanks for your blessing last night. I'll make sure it's memorable. I hit send. No response. Later, as I was folding laundry, my fingers brushed against the edge of an old wooden drawer in the corner of my closet. I pulled it open and found a small, yellowing envelope tucked underneath a stack of scarves. The name on it, just one letter. D. Written in her handwriting. My breath caught. I sat down, the envelope resting in my hands. Whatever it wasn't meant for me. But now it was mine. Let's see what you tried to forget, I murmured, sliding my finger under the flap. I didn't wake up, I came to. That's the only way to describe it. One moment, I was in the half-silence of early morning, and the next, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling through photos I didn't remember taking, photos I wasn't even in. Everyone had posted them, cousins, old neighbors, my mother's charity board friends. What a beautiful evening, one caption read. A perfect family moment. Another simply said, love wins. Funny. No one mentioned me. In any of them. My hands were stiff, cold, even though the room wasn't. I scrolled faster, hoping to catch even a glimpse of myself on someone else's feed. My dress, my shoes, the engagement ring Alasni had chosen after months of careful planning. Nothing. I wasn't just cropped out, I was omitted. Not a single text from family, not a call, not even a, "You okay?" after the dagger Adia had launched in front of everyone. The silence wasn't just loud, it was damning. While sipping reheated coffee from the night before, I checked my email and noticed a subject line from my alma mater, Alumni Spotlight Opportunity. They were requesting nominations for their monthly feature. I froze. My name had never appeared in that column, despite launching a boutique firm that had landed on the regional Top 40 Under 40 list. Yet I could still remember the year my mother had been mentioned there. I clicked Archive on the email, then sat completely still. 13 years old. That was the first time I learned the cost of being Adia's daughter. I'd entered a statewide design contest, an architecture challenge for middle schoolers. I built a model of a sustainable home made entirely out of repurposed shipping crates and garden glass. Won first place. I remember the moment I got the call. I'd screamed. She hadn't even looked up from her planner. 2 weeks later, the school hosted a small ceremony. The local press showed up. I wore a dress I hated, stood next to my principal, and smiled for the cameras. The following month, the Alumni magazine printed an article titled, Visionary Mother Raises Next-Gen Innovator. Adia's face dominated the cover, her bio stating how her creative influence shaped the next generation. Me, the one who actually built the damn model, was not quoted once. When I asked her why I wasn't interviewed, she didn't even blink. People want to hear from someone with perspective, Ruby. You'll get your turn, just not yet. Not yet. Back then, I believed her. But sitting in my kitchen now, years later, it wasn't bitterness that tightened my throat. It was clarity. This wasn't a slip. What happened at the engagement party wasn't the beginning. It was the pattern revealing itself in high definition. The front door clicked open. Alasni stepped in, damp from his morning run. His hair was matted slightly from sweat, and he carried the smell of cool January air. "You're up," he said, eyebrows raised. "Didn't sleep," I replied, voice thin. He leaned over the back of the chair and kissed the top of my head. "Hungry?" I shook my head. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with toast and scrambled eggs. He placed the plate in front of me and sat down. "I'm not crazy, right?" I asked. He tilted his head, waiting. "What happened last night? That toast. That wasn't just awkward, right? That was a message." "No, Ruby," he said gently. "It was intentional." I blinked. He rarely spoke about my mother. He preferred diplomacy, but not now. "I heard her," he continued. "Before she picked up the mic, she was whispering to one of your aunts. Let's hope she doesn't ruin this one." Her exact words. I exhaled through my nose, eyes stinging. "Why are you still here?" He looked at me like I'd asked if the sky was blue. "Because I didn't fall in love with your family." I fell in love with you. That sentence landed in the hollow space behind my ribs, the space that had felt vacant for years. I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. We sat together in a quiet that didn't need fixing. When he left to shower, I walked to the hallway closet and opened the box labeled Press Awards. Inside were my old medals, certificates, sketches from college. I pulled out the magazine clipping, the same article where my name was reduced to a footnote. In the background, I could hear the water running, but my focus stayed glued to that page. They applauded her for raising me, I muttered, but no one ever asked what it felt like to be erased by her. I went to my desk and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered above the keyboard before I clicked New Folder. I named it Truth. One by one, I began scanning the old clippings. I pulled screenshots of the family photo I'd been cropped out of. I took a screen grab of the engagement post where someone commented, "Stunning bride-to-be." And my mother had replied, "Yes, his family is so impressive." I recorded a voice memo. "My name is Ruby. I'm 32, and this is the story of how I stopped being quiet." Then I closed the laptop with a final click. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. The next time they told my story, it would have my name in bold. The envelope had no business being there. It sat beneath a tangle of forgotten necklaces in a velvet-lined jewelry box my mother had given me years ago, back when she still made grand gestures to balance the sharper ones. I hadn't opened that drawer in ages, but that night, something drew me to it. Maybe it was the aftertaste of the family photo I'd been cropped from, or the silence that lingered after my phone stayed still all day. I wasn't looking for anything, but I found it anyway. It was cream-colored, unsealed, and the name on it was barely a name at all. Just a single, delicate letter. D. Her handwriting. I knew it instantly. Slanted but controlled, like she wrote while holding her breath. I turned it over, inspecting the fold. Was this a mistake? Did she forget it? Or did she want me to find it one day, after she had the upper hand? Whatever the answer, I no longer believed in accidents. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From the weight of something not meant for me, now clearly mine. The paper inside was folded twice, carefully, and had softened from time. I sat on the couch and read the first line aloud softly. "It's been 5 years, and I still dream about the silence we never broke." I didn't breathe for several seconds. The rest of the letter read like poetry, written in regret. Adia, who never apologized for anything, poured herself onto those pages like someone begging the past to stay alive. "If I could start again, I would choose you, every time, even if it cost me everything I built." She wrote about Wilmington, a summer they shared, a garden she never told me about, wind chimes, how she used to sit beneath them while he read beside her. The man wasn't named, but he was real. I could feel him in her sentences, in her pauses, in the way she used the word "we" like it still meant something. One line gutted me. "I see pieces of you in someone new, and it terrifies me." I read it again, unsure if she was talking about my father or someone else. And then something shifted. What if the man in this letter wasn't my dad? What if he was someone I already knew? I tucked the letter back in and stared at the envelope in my lap, my mind racing. There were no initials, no date, no return address. But I knew someone who might recognize the story between those lines. I didn't text her. I just showed up. Petra had been my mother's closest friend since before I was born. She greeted me in her sunroom with warm tea and curious eyes, her scarf loosely knotted, glasses perched high. "I thought you might come," she said, ever one step ahead. I held out the letter without a word. She took it, her face neutral, until she read the first sentence. Then she stopped, her grip tightened. The room changed. "Where did you find this?" "In a box she gave me." Petra looked at me, really looked, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. A mix of recognition, guilt, maybe grief. "She wrote this, but never sent it," she whispered. "Who is he?" I asked. "Was there someone before my dad?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she set the letter down, took a sip of tea, and closed her eyes for a moment. "There was a man," she said finally, Years ago. Before your mother met your father. But she let him go before anyone knew. Or so she thought. My mouth was dry. Why? She wanted everything, Petra replied. And he wasn't someone she could control. That terrified her. Do you know his name? Her silence stretched longer than I liked. Then she nodded. Xanthi. The name rang through my chest like a dropped piano string. He moved back to Charleston last year, she continued. Quietly. He's alone. Still paints, I think. My pulse quickened. Does my mother know he's back? Oh, she knows, but she'd rather pretend he didn't exist than face what she lost. I leaned forward. Was it that serious? Petra looked me dead in the eyes. Your mother never forgave herself, but she never wanted anyone else to have him either. The words sat heavy between us. I thanked her and left without finishing the tea. Back home, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the living room, the letter in my lap, the air still. Someone knew. That line clawed at me. Was she referring to Alazan? Had she looked at him not as my partner, but as her past, revived? Images from the party flashed back, her eyes lingering on him, the slight hesitation before her fake laugh. I opened my journal. How do you compete with the ghost of a romance you never knew existed? I didn't have the answer, but I had the right question now. I stood up, ready to put the letter away. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You don't know me. But I knew your mother a very long time ago. I think we need to talk. No name, just a signature. X. I looked at the message, then the letter, then out the window into the dark. Maybe this story didn't start with me, but it's going to end with me. Sunday morning sunlight spilled across the long windows of the Belmont estate as servers adjusted place settings and white tablecloths flapped lightly in the breeze. The brunch was just starting, and I tried to keep my nerves in check as Alazny gently placed his hand on the small of my back. You'll be fine, he whispered, before heading off to greet his uncle near the patio. I stayed by the drinks table longer than necessary, gripping a mimosa I hadn't even sipped. His family was always polite, always smiling, but not necessarily warm. There was a performative sweetness to their greetings, like everyone had memorized the same Southern charm script. I'd met most of them before, but today felt different. The air around me was thinner, like it was being held on edge by something unsaid. Ruby, right? A woman with perfectly styled waves and pearl earrings appeared at my side. Yes, I said, offering a hand. I'm Valkyrie, Alazan's aunt on his mother's side. Her grip was firm, her smile practiced. You're even more lovely in person. I've seen your work in Charleston Living. I thanked her, but before I could redirect the conversation, she tilted her head and said, You know, you remind me so much of my cousin. Same cheekbones, same quiet intensity. I blinked. Your cousin? Xanthi, she said, eyes lighting up. He moved back last fall. After decades away, always the mystery in the family. Talented, bit of a recluse. Never married, no kids, unless he has some secret life we don't know about. She laughed, light and sharp. My heart slammed against my ribs. Xanthi. The name Petra had spoken with weight. The man in the letter. The ghost from Adia's past. I forced a smile and let the rest of Valkyrie's story pass over me like static. She kept talking, something about Xanthi's love for coastal art and how he'd once considered teaching, but I couldn't hear it. Not really. Was it possible? Could the man who haunted my mother's silence be a blood relative of the man I was about to marry? Later that evening, back at home, I asked Alazny as casually as I could, Have you ever met someone named Xanthi at your family events? He looked up from his laptop. Xanthi? Yeah, a couple times. Older guy? Mom's cousin, technically. He's kind of the family myth. Shows up once every 5 years, says almost nothing, disappears again. Do you know when he moved back? He furrowed his brow. Last year, I think. Why? No reason, I lied. He didn't press, but something in his eyes tightened, like he knew there was more behind the question. I excused myself and went into the bedroom. sat at the edge of the bed, and opened my journal. I can't tell if he's protecting me, I wrote, or protecting his family's secrets. The next morning, I got an invitation via email to the Belmont family's annual winter retreat in Hilton Head. It was standard, sent to all partners, and then, 2 hours later, a phone call. "Hey," Rowena said, voice stiff. "Small thing. Aunt Adia, your mom, called earlier this morning, said there's been tension. Thought it might be better if you didn't attend the retreat this year." I didn't even need to ask. I already knew. She was infiltrating his family now. "She's building fences," I said aloud after hanging up. "Not boundaries, fences." That evening, I texted Alazny, "Are you okay with this?" His reply came minutes later. "I'm working on it." I locked my phone and stared at the ceiling. There were moments when growing up, my mother would cancel plans at the last minute, claiming she wanted to protect me from exposure, from criticism, from people who wouldn't understand us. I always believed her. I thought she was shielding me. Now I see it differently. She wasn't protecting me. She was isolating me from opportunities, from relationships, from truth. When I tried to push back, she'd dress it up as concern. "I just don't want them to think less of you," she'd say. Or, "Let's wait until the timing's better." But what she really meant was, "Let's wait until I control the narrative." Now she was manipulating narratives that weren't even hers. I remembered something Maya Angelou once said, something that came up in a therapy group I joined briefly after college. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Well, I'd stopped counting how many first times she'd shown me. I wasn't just slow to believe her, I'd been trained not to. Later that night, after Alazny had gone to bed, I stayed up looking through old photo albums. I found one from a family reunion several years back. A picture of Alazny standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Taller, older, more weathered. The eyes were what stopped me. They were Xanthi's. I knew it the way you recognize your own reflection. Not because you'd seen it before, but because it mirrored something inside you. I stared at that picture for a long time, heart pounding. Did my mother fall in love with a face that eventually found its way back to me? It wasn't just eerie, it was disorienting. And if I'm honest, devastating. I picked up my phone. "I need to meet him," I typed. Not because of her, because of me. I didn't hit send yet. I just held it there, watching my own words on the screen. "If you want to outrun the past," I whispered, "first, you have to face it." The voicemail hit my inbox just after 9. It was short, cold, precise. "You've gone too far. If you insist on aligning with that man's family, then you are no longer mine." I listened to it 3 times before I moved. The words weren't said in anger. That's what struck me. They weren't screamed or sobbed or rushed. They were stated, like a fact, like she was reading off a grocery list. No longer mine. It sat heavy in my chest. Not because I believed it, but because I'd been waiting for her to say it for years, maybe my whole life. Still, hearing it aloud did something to me. She wasn't cutting ties. She was throwing me out of a story she thought she owned. I walked into my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser, where I kept old journals, and even older memories. One of them, age 7 or 8, held a line she once told me. "As long as you do what reflects well on me, I'll always support you." It was underlined in pink glitter pen. Support, it turns out, came with conditions. She never loved me for who I was, only when I reflected back the image she wanted the world to see. When I was useful, when I smiled on cue, when I didn't contradict her version of events. I placed the journal aside and stared at the wall. She didn't just reject me, she revoked my identity. And it was time I stopped pretending that hurt the way it used to. That afternoon, I called Ayala. She'd been my friend since college, one of the only people who'd stayed close during the chaos of my early career. We met for coffee at a small spot near my apartment. I needed a familiar face, someone who didn't feel like a moving piece on Adia's chessboard, or so I thought. "You look different," Ayala said, sipping her latte. "Like something cracked, but you're still standing." "I found a letter," I replied, "from my mom to someone named Xanthi." Ayala's smile flickered. "Xanthi? That's an odd name." "Not for her," I said. I've been trying to track down more about him. Her fingers gripped the cup just a little too tightly. Are you sure this is worth reopening? That was the first clue. I shrugged, pretending to let the conversation slide. We chatted a bit longer, surface-level things, but I couldn't shake the shift in her tone. The way she tried to steer me towards safer topics. It was unlike her. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just hadn't been looking closely enough. That night, I went home and checked my Wi-Fi logs. A habit from my old IT internship. I noticed something odd. Ayala's device had synced on my network. Frequently. Too frequently. Times I didn't remember her being over. Times she wasn't supposed to be nearby. She hadn't been a friend. She'd been a reporter. But not for a paper, for Adia. I stared at the screen for several minutes. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part of me wanted to cry. But mostly, I just felt tired. Of being watched. Of being shaped. Of being someone else's version of myself. The next day, I spotted Adia before she saw me. I was walking past the Oakleaf Cafe downtown when I caught sight of her inside, alone. Coffee in one hand, her signature silk scarf coiled perfectly around her neck. I don't know what came over me, but I turned and walked right in. She looked up, startled. Then, amused. "Ruby," she said, like I was the one who owed her an explanation. I sat down opposite her, calm, controlled. "You called me your daughter when it suited you," I said, "but you abandoned that title the moment I chose myself." She didn't blink. "I made you. Don't forget that." "No, you constructed me," I said. "I'm just now learning who I actually am." Her eyes narrowed. "Everything you have, your voice, your presence, your polish, comes from me." "No," I replied. "What I had was potential. What you did was hijack it." The cafe had gone quiet. Conversations paused. The air changed. She leaned in. "You're not my daughter anymore. Not to me. Not to this family." I stood up slowly, letting the silence speak. "That's okay," I said. "I didn't come here to be yours. I came to be mine." I walked out without looking back. Back home, I opened my truth folder. I added the voicemail, the cafe confrontation, recorded from my Apple Watch just in case, and then I opened a blank document and began typing a letter. Not to send, but to exhale. "She's disowned me, but I never belonged to begin with." I typed without stopping. The words poured out. I quoted Oprah, "You become what you believe, not what others believe about you." When I finished, I didn't print it. I didn't save it. I just stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. I wasn't looking for a reaction anymore. I was writing for myself. Later that night, I went down to the mailboxes, junk flyers, a bill, and one envelope, handwritten. No return address, just my name. Inside was a folded card, no greeting. Just a printed email chain. It was between Adia and Alazni's mother. Final message: "Trust me, she'll destroy him the way she destroys everyone who gets too close." I stood under the hallway light, reading it twice. Then I crumpled it in my fist and said aloud, clear and even, "You're not done? Neither am I." The text came just after 4 on a Thursday, the kind of message that freezes your breath mid-sentence. "I'm not asking for closure, just a conversation. Xanthi." It had been 4 days since I discovered the connection, my mother's ghost of a lover now stitched into my fiancé's family tree. And I hadn't told Alazin yet. Something about it felt too fragile to say aloud, too tangled, like speaking it would force it to become real before I was ready. I agreed to meet him the next day. We chose a small local gallery near the riverfront, a place known for showcasing regional artists but never too crowded. Neutral ground. I arrived 15 minutes early. The place smelled of old wood, lemon oil, and dried acrylic. Paintings lined the walls, low country marshes, boats at dusk, a few abstract pieces in deep blues and burnt sienna. The air was quiet, reverent. I wandered slowly, trying to tame the tempo of my pulse. Then I saw him. He wasn't what I expected. Not some weathered, dramatic relic of a love story. Xanthi was older, yes, but not worn, composed, clean-shaven. A pale gray sweater hugged his frame, and his posture carried no apology. He looked at me and smiled, small, knowing. "You have your mother's fire," he said, "but your own gaze." I don't know what I was expecting. Anger, regret, maybe guilt. But all I felt was the ache of recognition, like this man had haunted more than one generation. We walked in silence at first, past coastal scenes and iron gates. His voice was gentle but firm. "I used to show here, long time ago, before I moved north." I asked about his work, and he deflected. Then I brought up the letter, not directly, just enough for him to know. He sighed, long and low. "I wrote back once," he said. "She never responded." We sat on a bench before a painting, his, I think, of a garden filled with wind chimes, their shadows dancing over grass. "Why didn't you fight for her?" I asked. He looked at the painting, not me. "Because she didn't want love, she wanted possession." I swallowed hard. I could have given her anything except control, and that was the one thing she couldn't live without. I thought of every time Adia told me how to speak, how to dress, how to behave like a woman worthy of legacy. "She never forgave me for leaving," he continued. "But more than that, I don't think she ever forgave herself for wanting something she couldn't bend." Then he turned to me. "I hope you're not still carrying that for her." His words cracked something open. I wasn't sure if it was grief or gratitude. Maybe both. We left the gallery and walked the river walk in a breeze that smelled faintly of salt and magnolia. For a while, neither of us spoke. There was something healing in the silence, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "You don't look like her," he said after a while. "You remind me more of who she could have been, if she'd let herself." It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. And somehow, that meant more. We paused near a bench by the water. He sat. I stayed standing. "You know," I said, "you're the first person from her past who hasn't tried to explain her or defend her." He smiled faintly. "That's because I stopped trying to understand her the moment I realized she didn't want to be known, she wanted to be obeyed." We laughed about something small, forgettable. And for the first time, someone who knew her let me exist without being her echo. When we parted, he didn't hug me. He didn't say goodbye like a character in a story. He just nodded, and I nodded back. The air between us wasn't heavy anymore. That evening, I returned home and opened the wide drawer of my drafting table. I pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began sketching. Not something new, but something mine. A garden, yes, but not hers. Mine. Wind chimes hung from a pergola made of dark cedar. Beneath them, a bench that faced not a man, not a memory, but the sun. "I wasn't here to rebuild her history," I whispered. "I'm here to rewrite mine." I scanned the drawing, saved it to my archive, and added a note to my truth folder. Not for protection this time, for proof that I was evolving, that the story was still mine to shape. As night fell, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor with an old photo album. Halfway through, I paused. A picture from my childhood, me around 6, maybe 7. My parents at some formal event, my mother in a cream dress, my father beside her. She was looking at him, and it wasn't admiration. It wasn't love. It was hunger. The same look she gave Alasni at our engagement. I stared at the photo, chilled by the realization. What if it wasn't just one man? I whispered. What if I've been living inside her war this whole time? I shut the album and stood. Then it's time I ended it. Monday morning started with a simple intention. Finish the design proposal for the Hartwell project and maybe, if the mood held, grab lunch somewhere with a patio and live jazz. Something to remind me life wasn't all strategy and damage control. But peace, like most things these days, was interrupted before it had a chance to settle. I had just opened my office door when Jenna, my assistant, popped her head in. "Someone's here to see you," she said, her voice a half-whisper. "No appointment. Says it's urgent." "Who?" I asked, already walking toward the lobby. She hesitated. "Your mother." And there she was, Adia, in a slate-gray wrap coat, her lips painted wine red, her posture unshaken. She stood with one gloved hand clutching her purse, the other wrapped around a to-go coffee she hadn't touched, not a single strand of hair out of place, like a politician on the campaign trail, ready to spin, to win, or to destroy. "You came here?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She gave a soft laugh. "You gave me no choice." We moved to a private hallway near the back entrance. Staff and clients passed through, but I stayed composed. She wanted a scene. I wasn't going to give her one, at least, not yet. "I trusted you'd stay away," I said. "You made that clear. You are no longer mine, remember? That was before you started poisoning people against me." My laugh came quick and sharp. "Is that what you call speaking the truth now?" She narrowed her eyes. "You manipulated Xanthi. You've dragged old wounds into rooms they didn't belong." "He reached out to me," I corrected. "And we had an honest conversation, something you and I clearly never mastered." She stepped closer. "And Alasni? Are you trying to sabotage that too?" "I haven't needed to. You're doing a fine job." That's when it happened. Without warning, without wind-up, her hand cracked across my cheek. Loud, crisp, definitive. A woman walking past gasped and stopped in her tracks. One of my interns dropped a sample board. Someone in the conference room stood up halfway before sitting back down. The entire office froze. But I didn't flinch. I slowly turned my face back toward her, meeting her gaze head-on. "Please escort this woman out," I said to Jenna, who was now standing with wide eyes and a phone halfway in her hand. Adia didn't move. "You think you've won something here?" she hissed. "I created you. I can unmake you too." I adjusted the collar of my blazer. "Then maybe it's time I finished what you failed to complete." She left with a final sweep of her coat, heels clicking like punctuation marks of war. No apologies, no fear, just the delusion of someone who believed silence equaled power. But the office would never see her as regal again. Only cruel. Later that afternoon, while reviewing tile options at my desk, Cody, our IT manager, sent me a message. "Hey, just FYI, your email flagged an alert." Someone from an external domain accessed a forwarded thread. I checked. It was from your fiancé's mom. Opened an email from your mother. I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered for a beat too long. He continued. "Want to see the contents?" I nodded. Within seconds, the email loaded on my screen. From Adia Monroe to Elizabeth Beaumont. Subject, for your discretion. "She's emotionally unstable. You should encourage your son to reconsider this engagement. I would if I were you." No context, no attachments, just those 2 lines, cold and direct. I forwarded it to myself, printed a copy, tucked it into my folder, then leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She didn't just slap me in front of my staff. She tried to destroy the only connection I had left to something stable. She wanted me isolated, cornered, quiet. But I wasn't her puppet anymore. I was her unfinished script, and I was ready to rewrite the ending. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. We discussed restraining orders, public slander, and data breaches. I laid out everything: texts, emails, witness statements. She listened, typed notes, asked the right questions. I wasn't building a case out of revenge. I was building a perimeter. When I got home that night, I updated my truth folder, meticulously. Digital records, timestamps, personal logs. I labeled each one like chapters of a story I never thought I'd have to narrate. And then I sat down with a glass of red and drafted a statement. Not for the media, not for social media, but for me, a record, a line in the sand. "You don't win by shouting louder," I wrote. "You win by speaking last." I saved the document, encrypted the folder, and closed my laptop. Around 9:30 that night, I locked up the office after staying late to reorganize the samples cabinet. As I walked to my car, parked under a street lamp, I noticed a vehicle idling across the street. Dark, unmoving, but familiar. Adia's. She didn't get out, she didn't flash her lights, she just waited. She wasn't there to argue. She was there to watch, to witness whether her strike had fractured me. I stood by my car, keys in hand, heartbeat calm. "She's not coming to talk anymore," I said aloud to the empty street. "She's waiting to watch me break." I opened the door, slid into the seat, and whispered one more thing. "Let her wait. I've waited long enough." The invitation came tucked inside a cream envelope that smelled faintly of rosewater and performed politeness. My cousin Fiona was hosting a brunch. "Just close family, nothing fancy," the card read. She'd added a sticky note. "Hope to see you there, Ruby." I held the envelope between my fingers for a long time before deciding. It reeked of setup. Too soon after the slap, too soon after the silence, too soon after the stares. But this time, I wasn't going to let them speak for me, around me, or about me, without me. When Alazny offered to come, I told him no. "I need to do this without armor," I said. "If I'm going to be gutted again, I want it to be with my own hands holding the blade." He nodded slowly. "You sure?" "No," I said, "but that's never stopped me." That morning, I slid the old letter, the one I wasn't supposed to find, into my bag, along with the copied page from my mother's journal. Just in case. As I got dressed, I looked at myself in the mirror, then whispered, "They've talked about me long enough. Now they'll hear from me." The brunch was hosted in Fiona's backyard, tables lined with white linens, scattered vases of peonies, the scent of roasted vegetables and hollandaise rising into the warm spring air. People smiled too widely when I arrived, each greeting paired with an overused phrase, "So glad you came. We were just talking about you. Hope things are going well." I offered tight nods in return, moving like a guest in a home that had once been mine. Then I saw her, Adia, dressed in a pastel suit, sipping mimosa, laughing with Fiona like the last 2 weeks had been nothing more than a footnote. Her voice carried effortlessly over the rest, still the queen in the room. I didn't sit. I waited. Eventually, the conversations dulled. Plates were cleared, drinks refilled, and someone, an aunt, made a pointed comment about how loyalty should still mean something in a family. That was my cue. I cleared my throat and placed my bag on the table. "I'd like to read something," I said, my voice calm but sharp. A few people shifted. Adia didn't blink. I pulled out the letter. "It's been 5 years," I read, "and I still dream about the silence we never broke." Mouths stopped mid-bite. Silverware paused. Even the birds outside seemed to hold their breath. "If I could start again, I would choose you," I continued. "Every time, even if it cost me everything I built." I didn't cry. My voice wavered once, then steadied. "She wrote this," I said, "to a man none of you knew about, a man she loved more than she ever admitted, a man she lost, and then, instead of mourning him, she tried to erase him, and everyone else who reminded her of what she couldn't control." Adia's face remained unmoved. A sip of mimosa. A blink. That was all. I wasn't done. I pulled out the journal page, unfolded it carefully. "I never wanted Ruby to know what I lost," I read aloud, "because then she'd know what love should actually look like." A hush fell. Some eyes dropped to their laps. Others turned to Adia, waiting. She didn't move. "My mother didn't just fear losing someone," I said. "She feared anyone else winning." Still nothing. Fiona's husband cleared his throat. My Aunt Lorraine whispered, "We always wondered." I placed the papers back in my bag. "I'm not here for a reaction," I said. "I'm here for the truth." And then I walked out. The garden was empty. The air hit different outside the walls of curated conversation. I sat on a bench beneath the fig tree. Exhaled. My lungs shook, not from grief, but from release. Footsteps approached. Rowena. She sat beside me, folding her hands in her lap. "That wasn't about scandal, Ruby," she said after a long pause. "That was about survival." I nodded. "And I survived by finally calling it what it was." She didn't reply, just reached over and placed her hand over mine. I cried then, not from pain, Not from anger, but from the weight finally leaving my chest. Speaking the truth won't fix the past, I said softly. But it frees the present. I didn't go back inside. I didn't need to. As I walked down the driveway, sunlight warming the back of my neck, my phone buzzed. A message from Adia. You've embarrassed yourself, not me. I stared at it for a moment before typing back. Then you don't know what shame really is. I deleted the thread, put my phone away, and kept walking. Her silence had been loud, but mine just became louder. It was still dark outside when the knock came, not loud, just firm, persistent enough to cut through the haze of half-sleep. I glanced at the time, 6:42 a.m. I wrapped my robe tighter around me as I padded barefoot across the hardwood floors to the door. 2 officers stood there, polite, hands visible, badges clipped. Their expressions weren't threatening, but I didn't need them to be. The air behind them was already thick. Ruby Monroe? One asked. Yes. We're responding to a report filed this morning. Claims of harassment, emotional threats, filed by your mother. My mouth went dry. Adia Monroe? Yes, ma'am. They didn't step inside. I didn't invite them to. I stood there, one hand on the doorframe to keep myself grounded. You're not under arrest, the other clarified. We're required to follow up, make sure there's no immediate concern. I didn't blink. Give me a minute. I walked to my home office and returned with a slim blue binder, my truth folder. I handed it over, open to the incident log from last week, the recording of her slapping me at work, the voicemail she left, the letter I'd read at brunch, even the note she'd mailed after, hinting I was dangerous. The officer flipped through it silently. This is a lot of context, he finally said. She's not trying to stop a threat, I replied. She's trying to silence one. They left 20 minutes later. No charges, no warning, just a "we're sorry for the inconvenience." I didn't cry, I didn't shake, but I did sit on the floor for a long time, staring at the empty space where her portrait used to hang. I'd taken it down a few nights ago without fanfare. She'd rather paint me as dangerous than admit she was wrong, I whispered to no one. The next day, I attended a community event at the local church. Not for worship, this was more of a gathering. Potluck tables, recycled name tags, a chance for people to pass casserole and opinions in equal measure. I walked in expecting tension. Instead, I found Petra. She was near the back, chatting quietly with a few older women. She saw me and excused herself. Walked right over, no hesitation. I heard what she tried to do, she said gently, placing her hand on my arm. That's not just cruel, it's desperate. I didn't have words, just the pressure in my chest finally releasing. Later, during a group conversation, someone made the mistake of saying, "Well, Adia's always had her reasons." Petra's voice cut through before I could respond. Adia's reasons have always been control. Don't confuse pain with manipulation. The group fell quiet. You could have heard the hum of the air conditioning. Petra continued, unshaken. She's not the woman you think she is, and I stayed silent too long. I swallowed hard, blinking fast. Not from sadness, from the unfamiliar feeling of someone standing up for me without needing my permission. Afterwards, I walked through Hampton Park alone. The cherry blossoms were starting to bud again, early for the season, but beautiful nonetheless. I paused by the fountain and sat, letting the quiet settle. I used to fear this kind of solitude. Now, it felt like choice. You're not responsible for someone else's healing, I whispered to myself, repeating a quote I'd once underlined, especially when they refused to stop harming you. I thought about Alazan. He hadn't left, but he'd been distant, not absent, just unsure of where to stand while the ground between my mother and me kept shaking. But he hadn't run. That had to count for something. Maybe I needed to lose the wrong version of family, I murmured, to find the right one. That night, I sat in front of my camera and recorded a journal entry. No makeup, no edits, just me. She called the police, I said into the lens. She had me investigated, but I'm still standing. I didn't upload it, not yet. I watched it back once and saved the file. Then I opened a new document, an official counter-report. No embellishments, no anger, just the facts, the slap, the smear email, the false claim. It wasn't revenge, it was a record. Let the file show. I fought for my story, not to destroy hers, but to survive mine. The next morning, I stopped by the mailbox before heading to work. Bills, coupons, and one envelope, small, beige, with no return address. I opened it, standing right there by the curb. Inside was a letter written in my father's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Tall lettering, precise, dated years ago, before his passing, but the ink hadn't faded. If one day you ever question who you are, it read, remember, you were always more than what she tried to shape. The rest was simple, but it was enough. I held it to my chest and looked up at the early light breaking over the rooftops. Maybe, I whispered. I wasn't invisible to everyone after all. We met at a small cafe tucked away behind a florist on Broad Street, the kind of place with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs that somehow made everything feel safe. I hadn't seen Alazny in weeks, not properly. We'd texted, exchanged calls, but the closeness had thinned. I didn't blame him. I blamed the windstorm I'd become. He was already there when I arrived, tapping his fingers against a folded napkin. He stood when he saw me, still him, still familiar, but I noticed the way he hesitated before pulling out my chair. I didn't know if you'd come, he said. Neither did I. We sat in silence for a moment, not awkward, just cautious. Then he exhaled. I've been stuck, he began. Between you, my family, her. I didn't know who to trust, what to believe. I was afraid of being used. You thought I was using you? I asked, not offended, just tired. No, he said quickly. But I didn't want to be another pawn in the game you and your mother keep playing. I nodded. I'm not asking you to take sides, Alazan. I'm asking you not to betray the truth. He looked at me long, eyes sharp with something between guilt and certainty. Then he reached into his coat pocket and slid a piece of paper across the table. I opened it. A printed copy of an email. To Adia, he said. I sent it last night. The message read, You've lost control. But I haven't lost Ruby. My chest tightened. I didn't fall in love with a safe life, he added. I fell in love with the woman who dares to name the truth. That hasn't changed. I didn't cry, but the pressure behind my eyes throbbed. For the first time in months, I felt the ground under me solidify. I wasn't walking this alone. For the first time, I said softly, I'm not afraid of her anymore. Across town, at a converted warehouse now posing as an artist's studio, Adia stood in front of a tall canvas and an even taller man, Xanthi. She hadn't announced her visit. Just walked in, as if 20 years hadn't passed, as if she still had a place in his world. You're still painting, she said, circling the room like she owned it. I never stopped, he replied, not looking up. I remember this space, she said, glancing at the worn floorboards. It used to echo when we danced. He said nothing. She tried again. We were something once. We could be again. This time without fear. He finally looked at her, calm, steady, like time hadn't weathered him the same way. You weren't afraid of losing me, Adia, he said. You were afraid of not owning me. She stiffened, but kept her smile tight. I've changed. No, you've just gotten better at punishing people who didn't stay. She tried to laugh, but it cracked. I've seen her, he said. Ruby. She became the version of you I once hoped you'd be. Adia's jaw clenched. She'll destroy you too. He shook his head. No, but you already tried. There was nothing left to say. She left without another word. For the first time, she didn't control the exit. That night, back home, I received a voicemail from her. You think you've won? But all you've done is air dirty laundry for strangers. I saved the message. Not for court, not for evidence, just for closure. Then I opened my voice memo app and recorded a reply I would never send. You never tried to understand me. You only tried to undo me. And I'm done letting you. I hit delete before I could second-guess myself. Then I lit a candle, not in mourning, but in presence. It flickered gently, casting light without demanding it. I let it burn as I filed for a restraining order. Not out of fear, just boundaries. Finally. Later, I emailed my therapist, attached journal entries, photos, the truth folder. I labeled the new file, closure. There was a quote I used to read in college, one I never really understood until now. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's choosing peace when chaos begs for a response. I didn't want revenge. I wanted sleep. I wanted silence. But mine, not hers. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a small card. "A new collection is opening next month," it read. "I'd be honored if you were the first to see it. It's called The Ones Who Spoke. X." I smiled. For the first time, I felt like someone had painted me into a world I chose. I woke before the sun, not because of a bad dream or an alarm, but because stillness had finally found a way to fill my chest. I moved slowly through the apartment, careful not to break the quiet. There was a softness in the early light that I hadn't noticed in years. I reached for the coffee, then stopped. Without thinking, I filled the kettle and made tea instead. A small shift, but it felt like a line drawn in the sand. I was tired of brewing the same bitterness every morning. I sat at the table, tea steaming beside me, and opened the journal I'd kept since the first public rupture. My handwriting at the beginning was frantic, jagged sentences, pages torn from frustration. Everything sounded like pleading, for understanding, for love, for something resembling safety. I flipped to recent entries. The ink was darker, the lines straighter, the voice calmer. I traced one sentence with my finger. "You do not have to earn survival." Then I whispered, "I survived her." That means I can survive anything. No calls, no new messages. I set the phone down and smiled at the silence. Later that day, I met Alazny at the trailhead along the Charleston coast. He was waiting by the sign with 2 coffees in hand, one already going cold. We started walking before saying anything. The path led us between dunes, the ocean just out of view, but always within earshot. There was a comfort in walking beside someone who didn't need to fill every moment with noise. "I turned down the Denver trip," he said after a while. "Didn't feel right leaving during your show week." I glanced at him. "You didn't need to stay." "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." We passed a utility box painted with a mural I hadn't noticed before. Bold sunflowers growing from cracked pavement. In the corner, someone had written, "Grace is choosing to bloom where you were once buried." I paused. "That's exactly what I needed to see." Alazan smiled. "That's why I take this trail." He reached for my hand, but didn't pull. It was just there if I wanted to hold it. "You know," I said, "I don't need rescuing anymore." He nodded. "Then I'll just walk beside you. No cape, just coffee." For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel heavy. A memory surfaced. My mother once told me, "Strength is being quiet." I used to believe that. Now, I know the truth. Strength is not needing to shout to be heard. After our walk, I returned home to find a bouquet at my door. White lilies. No card. But I didn't need one. I stood with the flowers in my hand for a moment, then turned and dropped them directly into the outside trash bin. "Forgiveness doesn't always mean access," I whispered. Inside, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I drafted a letter, not to send, but to say what needed saying. "You were my mother. You taught me how to fight. You just didn't expect I'd ever fight you." I read it once, smiled, not bitterly but cleanly, and closed the file without saving. I picked up the phone and called Petra. "I just wanted to thank you," I said, "for speaking up, for not letting her be the only voice in the room." "You've always had your own," she said softly. "It was just waiting for you to trust it." "I think I want to mentor," I said suddenly. "High school girls. There's a community center not far. They have a self-worth workshop. I could start there." "You'd be perfect for it." That afternoon, I walked into the center and signed up. I spoke with the director about guest speaking opportunities, and by the end of our talk, she'd penciled me in for the next month. I couldn't rewrite my story with my mother, I said to her, but maybe I can help someone write theirs a little earlier. She squeezed my hand. Driving home, I didn't feel healed, but I did feel whole. That night, I stood in front of my mirror, no makeup, no filter, no angle, just me. I didn't pose, I didn't adjust, I just stared, and for once, the reflection didn't shrink. The next morning, the mail arrived early. Among the bills and flyers was a small box with a Charleston postmark. Inside was a framed miniature painting, swirls of blues and golds, abstract but alive. Attached to the frame was a handwritten note. You didn't just speak. You broke the silence for others. Proud of you. X. I held it for a long time and smiled, not because the painting was beautiful, but because for the first time, I was two. I arrived early, not to prepare, not to steady nerves, just to stand in the space before it filled with eyes and opinions. Xanthi's gallery had been transformed for our co-curated exhibit, Silent Daughters. Everything in that room had a story behind it. Abstract pieces layered in oil, torn paper repurposed into wings, glass shards arranged into mosaics that reflected both pain and survival. None of it labeled, just there, waiting to be seen. Guests began arriving slowly. I recognized faces, former clients, local artists, some who had read my name in the headlines over the past month but never reached out. And then, near the entrance, a familiar silhouette appeared. She walked in alone, dressed in navy. Not the kind of color you choose to celebrate, more like armor. Adia. I didn't flinch. I didn't greet her, just nodded once and walked past. She came expecting a scene. She didn't realize the scene had already been written, without her. Xanthi stepped to the front of the room as murmurs faded. Tonight, he said, is not about art. It's about truth painted with scars and clarity, and the woman whose voice turned silence into something we can see. He turned toward me. I stepped forward. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't tremble. I spoke. This isn't revenge. It's reclamation. These aren't wounds. They're brushstrokes. And tonight, I don't need validation. I need space. So for anyone here expecting the old Ruby, she didn't make it tonight. Applause followed, but I didn't listen for it. I watched my own breath steady in the air. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I stood still, grounded in a version of myself I'd been carving out quietly for years. After the reception, Petra pulled me aside. She tried again, she whispered. Adia went to the Historical Arts Board, said you weren't stable, that your work didn't reflect the values of their institution. I didn't ask what happened next. They removed her from their honorary panel. Turns out some former protégés came forward with their own stories. I nodded. You never need to swing the sword, I said softly. The truth will dull its own abuser. Back at home, I opened my truth folder one last time. I didn't cry over it. I didn't scroll. I just highlighted everything inside and hit delete, every email, every note, every photo. Truth had protected me. But it didn't have to define me anymore. I stepped out onto the balcony. The moonlight didn't feel like judgment anymore. It felt like possibility. I let it touch my skin. I breathed in and quoted the note on my wall. Closure isn't a door. It's a window you stop looking through. The next afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. Just my name, scrawled in brushstroke pen. Inside was a legal document. Partial ownership of the gallery, transferred to me by Xanthi. Attached was a handwritten note. For every daughter told to stay quiet, let this space echo instead. I smiled. She silenced me, I whispered, but I built a room where we'll never whisper again.